That's what I'm talking about, son. Get you some of that daggone pie.
Woo-hoo! Looky there. There's your bug-eyed big one right there.
Getting started. We're getting started.
Here's what I'm talking about. Gosh dang gorilla.
Let's go, baby. Straight meat. God, look at that big one.
Hey, welcome in everybody to the BAM Pod. This is Big Ed, your host, and tonight's guest we have Nick Cloutier. Nick Cloutier is a bass angler with the Apex Tour. He fished there in Northern California, grew up fishing the Delta, converted all of his skills over to the lakes, and is now fishing at some of the top levels in our sport. He is going to give us tonight and break down a little bit of how he converts some of his wintertime techniques. It's like punching and flipping and the different ways he approaches lakes compared to the river system and how it's affected him and what he had to do to make the changes. So it's a good show. He talks a lot about being very versatile throughout. So let's just sit down, tune in, and listen to what he's got to say. All right, let's get this thing started. All right, everybody, welcome into the show. This is the BAM Pod, and I'm your host, Big Ed. And on the line tonight, we have got Nick Cloutier, and he is a apex angler, a pro angler here in California, does a heck of a job out there, has finished in the top 10 a bunch of times now, and is really, really making some waves. He's a heck of a fisherman, and I'll tell you what, he's going to have some good information for us. We're going to talk a little bit about some flipping and punching this time of year, which is always unique because we don't think about that. We just had another guy kind of talk about that, but we're going to break this down with a little bit more grass and how he works it. So, Nick, welcome into the show, man. We appreciate you coming on.
Oh, no worries, man. I appreciate you.
All right. Well, you were out tonight and or today, you did a little bit of fishing on the California Delta. And, I talked to you a little bit about, what your techniques are, what your strong suits are. And, you talked about being on the river a lot, and it's such a different fishery from fishing the lakes. But you said in the last 5 years, you've started to really do the lake thing and fish some of these tours. And obviously you did fairly well because you qualified for the Apex, which is only a qualification setup. So why don't we talk a little bit about, what the difference is that you're finding with these rivers compared to the way they fish in the wintertime compared to the lakes that you, and how you transitioned over into that. Cause that's something that guys, all across the country, people who are fishing have to do, that current, no current, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, it's a lot different, coming from the Delta and then jumping into these lakes. As everyone knows, the Delta is a shallow water fishery. So once we hit, the winter months, a majority or pretty much all of the Florida strain, they really shut down. They don't really have, deep rock pile to go off to. They are not the main predator in the river system as if they were in a lake, where they could basically go wherever they want to, and they don't really have to worry about too many things chasing them down, trying to eat them like you do out here, big stripers, sea lions, they'll pick them right off. So they stay fairly shallow. I'm sure there's some spots out here on the river where they kind of pull off and can do their thing. But like you were saying earlier, the flipping and punching, I could barely do that year round out here. It's, it's really cold out here, but those fish will stay shallow, tucked under. Because if you think about it, a lot of that dead hyacinth, it's like a warming blanket. That sun's beating down on it, and they just sit up underneath there. And you could have some really good days in the wintertime punching mats, and then you can have days like I had today, fairly slow. It just, there wasn't a whole lot going on. But the water temps are rising, and honestly, I'd rather go out there with a flipping stick and blank than go out there and, catch a couple 12 inches with a drop shot. So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, as compared to like the lakes, they get all schooled up and, they hang out on the rock, they go out deeper, you find a big school of them. I mean, you could sit there and literally pick them off and, find a couple rock piles here and there and just rotate them, and you can be catching fish the whole time and, from small to big. So it's especially out here, you know, you have the tidal system. So you're constantly running around. You're, you know, if you're looking for high water, you can literally follow the tide all the way down south, or vice versa. You know, you run it back up and find that window where these fish are biting, and that's the key out here. And what I've noticed, fishing the lakes, is they basically have the same thing. It's just not tidal wise, but there's windows on these, you know, rock piles and you know, big flats and stuff like that in these lakes where these fish will turn on.
Right.
And it'll happen like that. Bam, all of a sudden, you know, I've had it happen a lot at Clear Lake where I've fished the whole day and, you know, I got a small limit, and then all of a sudden at 3 o'clock, you know, my weigh-in's at 3:30, and at 3 o'clock, it's just bam, 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 bam. And it's, you know, you go all day and you're just like, oh man. And then all of a sudden it just turns on. It's just right spot, right time, and just kind of knowing when to be there. That's the key. And that's the hard part too. You know, you're on one end of the lake and your mind's saying, hey, run up this side, and then you're saying, no, I want to stay here. So that's the tough part. You know, you really got to follow your gut instinct when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Right. So I guess trying to break that down, I guess, you know, I've run into that, and I've seen a lot of times where, you know, you do have those windows. When you're in a tournament, you know, it's I think it's probably a little harder to kind of just stay on one spot the entire time and just know, unless you are catching fish the whole time. But, you know, how do you tell a guy that's, you know, going out there for the weekend and he is, you know, I'm going to go sit out here, go to Clear Lake, or I'm going to go to any, you know, lake across the country, Gunnersville, whatever it is, you know, and it's like, hey, I gotta sit down and I gotta sit on a spot. You know, how do you tell a guy like that, hey, even though you haven't been catching maybe but a few, when do you kind of give up on a spot and head to something else when you're, you know, having days like that? Is there a I don't want to say there's like a magic, you know, window, but when do you just go, yeah, this ain't gonna do it, and I got to do something else?
Yeah, no, I run into that situation a lot. So basically what I'll do is, you know, I'll sit in the area, and thank God for the electronics that we have now. The live scope.
Yeah.
The live scope has changed a lot of the way that I fish. You know, that I could tell when I pull up to a spot if they're there or if they're not. Or if they, you know, maybe they were up shallow one day, but now they pulled up. I could move around and I could find them. And that's kind of the key with what I do when I sit down on an area. I will locate them, you know,
Right.
figure out, okay, they're sitting off over here on the left side of this shoal. You know, start firing in my confidence baits, you know, jig, or, you know, this time of the month, you know, on a lake, you know, a rig, swim bait or something like that.
Right.
And see how they react to it. You know, if I'm catching them, then I'll keep pounding them. You know, eventually I'm hoping that I'm going to run into some good ones. But if I'm going and going and they're biting, bam, 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 and then it shuts down, you know, I'll give it 30 minutes where I'll start, you know, kind of wandering around, you know, seeing maybe these fish pulled off somewhere, or maybe they're feeding out here now. The school's moved.
Right.
Give it about 30 minutes. And if it just kind of shuts down, then I just pick up the trolling motor and move, because that fight is happening somewhere else on that lake or the river.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just constantly trying to find those bites, find those biting windows. So if I don't get bit for 30 minutes, sometimes I'll sit there for an hour, depending on the size of the fish that I was catching. But yeah, once that bite shuts down, trust me, it's really hard to pick up that trolling motor and leave. But you got to do it when you know, especially when money's on the line.
Right.
Time is everything, and I don't like to waste it at all. So
now, when you
I
find
give it about 30 to an hour.
When you find something like that, let's say that you find that at like 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, Is that a spot you'll go back to during the day? Is that something like, you know what,
Yeah.
that place was on fire, I'm going to go back in there and hope that thing turns back on?
Hmm. Yes, exactly. That is exactly what I do.
Okay.
The last couple, probably the last year or two up at Clear Lake is a perfect example. I had a spot up there where I always would start in the morning, always. And it's very strange. You would get these windows where the smaller fish, the 2 to 3 pound range, would be up there feeding. And then you would get a window of the larger 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, pound class feeding. And I would go there in the morning always. And I would, spend a good hour or two in there, and I'd always be able to catch something. But, if they're the smaller, the 2 to 3s, I'm loading up on those. Okay, they'll shut off. I'll take off, and I'll come back in the afternoon.
Right.
Or it's vice versa. I'll catch a big one right out the gate when I go there in the morning, and then I'll take off and go do whatever I got to do. But I always came back to that spot because I knew in that certain area there was big ones that would pull in. It was just a matter of, being there at the right time when they would pull up to eat. And it was crazy because you would never catch a smaller fish when those big ones pulled up on there. You catch like one or two, giants, and then it shut off for a long time. And then you come back and there'd be 2-3 pounders there. So there's certain areas that I do that. I will always come back at a different time in the day.
Just to see if you can get it back started up, see if you can get that to turn back on, or is it just that it's holding, and if you find a spot that's holding some fish, they're probably going to be there, at least the day.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to see, first of all, I knew, for practice, like if you go out and practice or something, the river is a little bit different. That's why I'm using Clear Lake as a good example.
Right.
Because if you find them on a lake, chances are they're not really going to go too far. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or they'll stay there, but you got to just kind of get them fired up. The lakes, you could really you catch one big one, and all of a sudden the other ones are kind of like, okay, what's going on?
Right.
But the river it's just a whole different story. I mean, there's some areas that they're really grouped up in, and you can do that, but once that tide hits a certain point, it's done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those fish have such small windows out here that it makes it extremely difficult for people who've never fished it. But there's guys that stumble across it. You go down a bank, catch nothing, all of a sudden you got 30 pounds.
Right.
It's just how it is out here, and it's crazy.
So one of the things we started off with tonight was we were talking a little bit about the flipping and punching kind of thing. Wintertime is not just it's just not one of those times when you think about flipping and pitching on a regular basis. Like, I mean, I don't know, I say that, but I don't mean necessarily, you don't flip or pitch, or punch. I mean, but you end up thinking about those when it's high, it's summer, it's hot, the fish are looking to get under someplace and get in a shade. What's the difference between flipping and punching now and flipping and punching in the summer? And how do you kind of make those adjustments in the winter? And are you looking for something completely different target wise?
No, as far as target wise, I'm looking for about the same thing. There's a certain mixture of vegetation that I look for out here, and I'll try to find it in the wintertime, springtime, summer, fall, and it always holds fish. And comparing winter to spring or the summer months, when I'm punching in the winter, I'm doing it very slow.
Okay.
Those fish are frozen. They don't want to move, and you're trying to get a reaction bite. That's what punching is. You're getting a reaction out of them,
right? Which
is fairly difficult to do in the wintertime. So you really have to hit them right in the face. And I mean, there's more times than none they will not swim over to your bait to get it. You really have to just brush that thing down right on their nose when it's coming down. But I do it very slow compared to the springtime, summertime, and fall, where, I'm burning down the bank, flip it in, pop it a few times, I'm out, I'm on to the next spot. I'm just going. As far as the winter, I'll kind of hunker down and do it very slow. Sometimes I'll let it sit there for, a minute or two. But
Really?
like I said, if you could get them to eat in the wintertime doing that, it's going to be big. And that's why I would rather do that in the wintertime than, throw a drop shot or something like that. Because, a tournament, that's five of your biggest fish.
Right.
And right now, if you catch one fish for 8 pounds right now on the river, one fish for 8 pounds, you might win it. And if not, you're going to be in the top 5. I don't know if you guys have seen the weights from out here, but it's been pretty brutal.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you mentioned, is this time of year is there's been a little change going on, and we are, we're basically starting to talk about, pre-spawn compared to the winter patterns as much. Now on the lakes, it's not quite there. We're still looking at 40 and 50 degree water. So we've got a few degrees to go. And we've got, February to come. I know January's been, this has been one of our driest Januaries ever, but in the history, but it's also, we have February coming up. We're going to have, which is notoriously one of our wetter seasons. So we're gonna have a lot of water coming in, a lot of things moving. Do you see, with the river, it's a little different because you don't have, stability of the lake just rising. You have water constantly flowing. So the water temperatures are going to change. Are you normally seeing the river kick off spawn wise before the lakes or a little after the lakes? And when do you think that really starts up? Because it usually starts up a lot earlier than people think.
Yeah, the fish out here, the reason I say it kind of kicks off sooner than the lakes, this river system is so mass that, down south, the water temp could be, 2, 3, 4 degrees warmer than what it is up by, let's say, Frank's Track. So those fish down south might be getting ready to do their thing, as to where these ones are still in, their winter modes. So it's always good to, go online or something, and you could check water temps online. But I definitely see that the Delta, depending on which areas are warming up faster, they kick off the spawn, I believe, sooner than the lakes. Plus it's a very shallow water fishery, that
right.
It doesn't really take a whole lot to warm this water up and get these fish going. But as quick as that water can warm up, it can cool down just as fast. So
yeah, right.
If you get if you get a solid couple weeks of this nice weather like we've been having, then they'll start going into that pre-spawn and spawn mode, and you'll be able to find them on beds. But all it takes is a couple of days of that cold, nasty weather to come through to just shut them right back down.
Right.
So it's really tricky out here, but there's always an area that's a lot warmer than others.
Kind of going back a little bit, is there anything different as far, you talked about a little bit of time that you'll soak that bait. Is there different colors you use in the winter? Are there different things that you use, as far as that bait goes? Is when you're flipping and punching, are you downsizing, are you going bigger, are you going, is there something that you really kind of change up? Do you change your weight? Do you what's some of those keys that guys, because most of what we're looking, at is guys who are going to be weekend anglers going out and wanting to learn a little bit about, because flipping and punching it's a technique that some guys really gravitate towards and do well with, and other guys struggle with, just because you have to cover some water and you have to find that different edge and that different, different areas. What do you kind of, if you're going to go out and you're going to tell a guy, hey, this is what you want to do for a setup, what's the things that you kind of change for winter in that sense, weights and baits and all that?
So when I go into the winter punching mode for myself, it's I really downsize the weight, which can be very tricky because, with all the cold, dead hyacinth and everything, it can be hard to get it through. So I always have maybe 4 or 5 flipping sticks on my deck, and I'll have, a 3/4 ounce, an ounce, ounce and a quarter, and an ounce and a half. And I really don't like to go higher than an ounce and a half any time of the year. But I always try to go with the smallest weight possible to get that rate of fall really slow going down there. Those fish, they don't want to move. So if you can get it to really, slowly fall right past their face, the chances of that fish striking it and not using a whole lot of energy to do so is a lot higher than an ounce and a half or a 2-ounce weight that's just bulleting past their face, and they're like, they don't even know what just happened.
Right.
So downsizing my weight, that's key. Another thing that I really look for when I'm out there is clean, green hydrilla.
Okay.
It's hard to find,
Right.
but once you find it, they're in there. They hunker down in there, and then once I find that, I'll see how thick it is. That'll basically tell me, what size weight I'm going to use. And I could use a 1 ounce and some thick stuff. And what a lot of guys do is they'll flip it in, it falls on top, and they just reel it back in. If you flip it on there and just, with kind of like a bow in your line, and just, wiggle it just a little bit, keep your spool open, and just, it'll drop a little bit, let it go, kind of keep that bow in, and eventually, more times than none, it will go through.
Right.
You just got to be patient and wiggle it in there. And as far as baits, I always keep one with a skirt and one without. Sometimes they want the skirt, other times they don't. So if I'm in an area, I know they're in there, and I'm flipping it with a skirt, but I'm not getting bit, I'll turn around and I'll go back without one.
Okay.
And just to see, just to double check, just a very small area. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there. I'm just going to go down one way, turn around, come back the other way. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes they want that skirt. Sometimes they don't want nothing to do with it.
That's an
as far as
interesting
bait.
Yeah, hold on, because that's a real interesting thing right there, is the kind of the, skirt, no skirt kind of deal. Have you found one way or the other really makes a difference, or is it just pretty selective, like certain fish want it, or is it times of day or whatever? I mean, I don't, I've never been one that uses the skirt a lot.
So things that I've figured out, when I'm flipping hydrilla by itself, they want the skirt. When I'm flipping hyacinth with no hydrilla underneath it, they don't want the skirt.
Okay.
Why? I have no idea. But that is one thing that I've really keyed in on. If I'm flipping hyacinth and there's nothing underneath it, right, I will not put a skirt. I will not flip a bait with a skirt on in there. But when I'm flipping hydrilla, I always have a skirt. It's the weirdest thing. But you could catch them in the hydrilla skirtless too. So that's why I have it. But I mean, not necessarily right now. I'm saying more in the spring and summer.
Right.
It's weird. They're real finicky sometimes, and it's always good to just have both.
Now, do you find that when you're flipping an area or punching an area like this, as you're going in this time of year, do you start to see, I don't want to say start to see, but do you notice that there's like groups of fish in an area, or are you seeing them scattered out more? What in the wintertime, I like on a lake, you normally start to think of their big schools or in these big packs hunting. And once you get into some fish, you kind of stay there because there's going to be a bunch of fish there. Or is it just on the river system? Do you really find that they are, hey, you're still looking for singles? They're just not, they don't group up that much.
So what I've really found out with playing with my live scope, in the last year or so, I've always thought they're just scattered. You know what I mean? It's just one here, one there, and that's why you just keep moving and stuff like that. Like I went out today, and I've been going out in the past, couple months. They school up just like they do in the lakes. I mean, I'll look at my live scope and I'll see 4, 5, 6 fish, together.
Right.
And before that, electronics, I always assume that it's just one here, one there, but you're only catching the one out of the group.
Right.
Because once you pull the one out, it seems like they go into panic mode and they don't want to touch anything. So it's very strange because I went out today and I seen a bunch of them. Right. And I dropped down to one or try to trick one and then, they didn't want nothing to do with it. But in the past, I've dropped down and caught one, but then I couldn't catch the other one. So that's why I always thought that the fish were so scattered out. You're only picking off one here, one there. But in reality, they school up just like the lake. But they're just a little bit more finicky because it's such a shallow fishery.
Well, see, and that's kind of the difference. You talked earlier about finding a rock pile or something out on a lake, Clear Lake, and you throw out there and you catch one of the fish, and all of a sudden that maybe ignites the school. It turns them on and makes the other ones want to feed also because, oh, this one's feeding and he took off, so he'll be back or whatever. But let's start feeding. But finding the river is just completely opposite. It's just because of the shallow, to it, or is it just different fish?
I think so. I've tried to figure that out before. Like when I was out today, I tried to figure it out, and it's just so much different than a lake.
Right.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because I always bring it back to they're not the top of the food chain, so they're a little bit more skittish. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you go to the lake and you catch one, and all of a sudden they all start going crazy. But out here, you catch one, and it's kind of one and done. You know what I mean? So it's very, very strange and very different than the lake. Right.
Now, I mean, I don't know how to translate that across the country. But there are a lot of places, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, where, you're dealing with a lot of really shallow waters. And I'm guessing that, when you're fishing shallow water like that you're going to probably run into that, here and there. And as you get into some lakes that have deeper water, you maybe run back into what a more traditional lake style is. So I kind of wonder if that's something that happens all over the place or not.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I don't have an answer because I haven't really fished a place like the Delta,
right,
that has, a deeper side to it where you could, kind of relate, where you could bounce back and forth and it still be a tidal fishery and catch them out deep.
Yeah, I can't really think of any place here locally for sure.
Yeah, as far as me, I haven't been out to those lakes and river systems, but
right.
Yeah, that I'd be real curious to see how those fish react compared to these ones.
Right. Yeah, and it is that is a good point. You are a California guy. You fished out here. You haven't really fished across the country or been out there and seen some of the other waterways. But what's it kind of been, I don't, how long have you been tournament fishing as far as, just how long have you been tournament fishing?
Started around when I was probably around 18. I was fishing. I would literally jump into every tournament there was out here when I was about 18 years old.
Right.
And I would get my teeth kicked in every single time. I mean, that was when Mark Daniels was out here, Barrick, Chris Ball, D. Thomas, all those guys. And, I thought I was going to do well.
Yeah.
And then, I just wanted 5 fish. I didn't have an idea of the caliber of fish these guys were catching until, you know, my first tournament, which was in like the springtime.
Right.
And I don't know if it's an ABA or a hook tournament or something like, I don't know. I had like 9 pounds, you know, I'm like, all right, cool. I got 5, you know what I mean? I'm going to be up there. And I probably was in like last place. It was like 30 pounds, 32 pounds, 28 pounds, 26 pounds. And my mind was blown. I was like, man, I've caught a couple big fish, but you guys are catching 5 of those? I got to catch 5 of those things? Oh, man. It took me a long time to figure this place out. And it still, you know, gets me every now and then.
Well, and now you've done...
18 years old was about the time I started.
And how old are you now?
33.
There you go. So that's not a long, it's 14, you know, 14 years. That's not, you know, that's not a horrible time frame to get as far as you've gotten. I mean, you've gone a long ways in a short period of time, really. You know, I mean, obviously guys have done it, you know, quicker and that sort of thing, but you know, to deal with, you know, it's always interesting to me, you know, mentioned one guy in there in D Thomas, and I remember when I was fishing and it's like, yeah, you pull up and this guy gets out of his boat and he's on oxygen and he can't hardly walk anymore. And he comes up there and he drops a bag on you. That's like, really? You just dropped 30 pounds and walked away. That's lovely, D. Thanks for doing that. You know, and you're out there working your butt off and this guy just drops everything on you. But you know, it's disheartening a little bit. But
oh yeah,
you know, but you get out there and you talk about it, and now you're fishing up in the apex level, which is, you know, out here in California. That's right now. That's pretty much our top level. And you know, in this 14, 15 years that you've been doing this, it's a heck of a, you know, to make that level is impressive. And now you're fishing against guys. But one of the things that you talked about is, you know, you started off on the Delta, you fished the Delta, you grew up on the Delta. You cannot qualify for the apex on the Delta. You have to go switch it up and fish other fisheries. What was your big transition? What was your, did you like to have to start over, you know, and go, God, you know, I've got all these great ideas on the Delta. I'm doing well finally on the Delta. Now I've got to start all over and do well on these lakes. And I always joke with Zach Thompson, who's another apex angler and a guy out here, because every time he goes to Shasta, it's like, dude, there's no grass, there's no tules. How the heck do you ever win? How do you ever do well up there? You don't even know what to look for. You know, what was the transition on doing that, you know, and finding all of a sudden I've got to figure all kinds of new things out. You know, how long did it kind of take you to do that? And have you found that, you know, the Delta gave you a good basis of that, or is it just, nope, start from scratch, throw it away, start over?
Tired of searching through ads to find bass articles in your favorite fishing magazine? Well, we have a solution for that. Introducing Bass Angler Magazine, with over 30 articles in every issue, filled with tips and techniques to help you catch more fish. Follow the pros as they publish the most up-to-date seasonal methods to catching bigger bass. Whether you're a beginner or professional angler, make Bass Angler Magazine part of your gear today. Be a part of the fastest growing bass publication in the nation. Log on to bassanglermag.com with code TV and save 20% when you subscribe now.
I mean, I mean, for me, I've always wanted, you know, like probably all the other tournament guys, I want to fish the tour. You know what I mean? I want to go back east. And I can't do that if I'm only fishing a tidal water fishery in my backyard. So basically, yeah. So what I set out, I was like, okay, well, you know, let's go try to do these lakes and you know, let's run the whole circuit, you know, and just see how it pans out. And for the longest time, dude, it kicked my ass. Yeah. You know, out here, I'm 65-pound braid and, you know, 20-pound fluoro. And I go to these lakes, you know, when I really first started fishing lakes, and, you know, I'm throwing braid and I'm throwing all this other stuff, and it just wasn't working. So it really took me it was kind of a shorter amount of time than fishing out here, but oh man, I used to go to the lakes and just get my teeth kicked in by all these guys, and I couldn't figure out why. And then, I started going back and switching it up, trying this, trying that, and then I finally started to, realize, okay, I cannot take my Delta gear to these lakes. I need to switch it up. The only place that I could take my Delta gear and probably literally not cut anything off is Clear Lake.
Right.
And I feel like that's why I do well at that lake, is because it's very similar to the Delta. There's just no tide.
Right.
So places like Shasta, I really feel like I can win there. And I really haven't had that great of a tournament there. But for some reason, I feel like I could win there. I feel like I could win at Clear Lake. I feel like I could win at New Maloney's.
Right.
And, Clear Lake, I've gotten really close to winning a big tournament up there. But Shasta, I don't know. I don't know why, but I feel like I could win a major event on Shasta. And because it kind of fits. Basically, if I can get some weather on Shasta and I catch them on the A-rig,
Yeah.
I feel like I can win up there.
Yeah, that's.
But it took a lot of practice. It was basically starting from scratch when I started fishing lakes.
Is that
I'm still learning.
I was gonna say, when you started fishing lakes, was that the very first time you held a spinning rod, or was that, or was it something you've been proficient on the Delta with?
No, a drop shot used to be my favorite thing on the river.
Oh, really? Nice.
When I really first started out, the first 10-pound bass I ever caught on the river was on a drop shot.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of the good tournaments when I really first started out, they were on drop shots. I used to throw a drop shot religiously out here. And then it wasn't until, I started flipping, pitching, chatterbaits, crankbaits, all that kind of stuff. And now I rarely throw a drop shot out here. If you pass me on the river and you see a drop shot in my hand, it's a rough day. I'm having a tough tournament.
Either that, or you just stumbled into a big sack of fish on the drop shot again. Because I know there's plenty of guys who've done that. But as it's funny because you transition over into the lakes, you transition over into, away from these bodies of water, and you start getting on to different techniques. Is there something you've picked up that you've really gravitated towards as far as a technique on lakes that you just find is, hey man, I just catch them everywhere when I do this, and it's just my confidence lure now?
I'd probably have to say a jig and an A-rig.
Yeah.
I love jig fishing.
Mm-hmm.
I love A-rig fishing. But if they're eating a jig, I am so happy.
Yeah.
The way I see it is throwing a jig, it's like punching on the Delta.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You throw it out there, you drag it, you feel the tick, tick, and you swing hard.
Right.
And that's why I kind of gravitated towards, if they're eating a jig, I'm throwing a jig. But the A-rig bite, that's so much fun.
Now with the A-rig, are you really finding it seasonal? Or do you pretty much throw it all year long? Or, what's the...
No, definitely seasonal.
Okay.
If they would eat it year long, I would throw it year long.
Right.
I personally have not found the year-long bite with that. But, winter and early springtime, you can have some awesome days with that thing.
Right.
And it's a fun bite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like on the river, a chatterbait is one of my keys. And I feel like it's basically throwing a big chatterbait out on the lake.
Right. I just did I went fishing this last weekend, did the same thing, put the A-rig out and started catching smallmouth on it and just had a blast. So I love the A-rig too, but I'm one of those guys. I have not found it to be after the spawn. Once the spawn's over, it's like I can't buy an A-rig fish. It just seems like they have no interest, which makes zero sense to me. But I don't know. But it's one of those things.
No,
And
I feel for you.
yeah. And in the jig bites, now that's a year-long bait. It's one of those ones that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to matter when or how they get it. They'll bite a jig any time of the year, just depends on what mode the fish are in and what they're really keying in on. As far as your jigs, what's your favorite little setup for a jig and all that? And let's take that to, take that to the lakes first, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll throw the same ones that I throw out here for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I really like to stick with the half ounce, depending on how deep I'm going, I'll, bump it up to 3/4. Half ounce, I usually get, I make my own stuff myself,
mm-hmm.
but, another company that I was really, I really like their jigs was Dandy Baits. They're out of Reno. I'm pretty sure they're still in business. But I used to throw that guy's jigs religiously.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, depending on depths, 3/8. I really try to stay away from the lighter stuff, but I've learned this year that sometimes the lighter stuff works. Like I said,
Right.
I'm still learning to fish the lake deal. But I would always throw a half ounce and, green pumpkin.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what place I'm fishing will kind of judge my trailer. Like
Right.
I bet, for Shasta, for instance, I always throw the twin tail grubs. Clear Lake, I always throw a beaver behind it.
Right.
And then Berryessa, for example, I can catch them on both.
Right.
So, but out here on the river, I throw a beaver style bait behind it.
Right. Just comes through the grass better, or is it just the action?
I think it's just a bigger profile
Okay.
with these bigger, Florida strain largemouth that we have out here.
Right.
Just a bigger, bulkier, bait for these fish to key in on, because there's such big and mass amounts of crawdads that live in this river system. So I try to keep it bigger and bulkier where I know there's bigger fish around. For example, Clear Lake in the Delta.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's I don't know. I love the jigs. I've done them for a lot of times too. And it is, I think you do step up your bite and you do end up getting a little better fish, even if it's only a half a pound. Sometimes that, that makes a difference.
Yep.
A lot of the things that we talk about here, like what's the types of baits and that sort of thing. What's the transition point that you start, because we're going to end up going into this spawn. When do you start throwing a little more? I haven't heard a ton of reaction other than the A-rig. When do you start throwing more reaction baits, or is that just all year long, or are you focused at some point to where you start transitioning into more of a reaction bite look?
For example, I'll start with the Delta out here. I throw a reaction year round.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That falls in the same category as punching. I will throw a chatterbait year round out here.
Okay.
And I've had great days. I've had, was it like last year or the year before? I had 28 pounds in December on a chatterbait.
Right.
And it's a lot. It's baits like that get overlooked by people. Oh my God, it's cold. I got to throw a jerk bait. I got to throw a Ned rig.
Right.
I'll never throw a Ned rig. I hate those things. But or drop shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'll do the same thing on the lakes. You know what I mean? I'll throw a chatterbait in the wintertime. I'll throw a big swim bait,
Mm-hmm.
a rig. So I love the reaction bite. And I kind of feel that's more my style as a power fisherman.
Right.
But it all falls in. If you're fishing for 4 or 5 hours and you're throwing reaction and it's not working, it's time to switch it up.
Right.
And that's what I like about this Apex deal is it really makes you have to react to the situations that are happening.
Yeah.
I've never been to Lake Mojave. Never even seen water that clear in my life. So, it took me a while to, I didn't catch my first fish till like 9 or 10 o'clock.
Right.
And, it just takes you a little bit longer to figure out what these fish want. So it's, I always start with reaction, always.
Okay.
And that's what I ended up doing. I started with reaction, and then once I would find fish, I'd throw, I was throwing a spider jig out there, a hula grub from Yamamoto.
Right.
So I'd use a ball head with a Kitech, and I'd find the fish, and then I would slow down with the hula grub and kind of pick the areas apart. So I'll do that with everything, year round. I'll always start with reaction.
Okay.
And if they're telling me they don't want that, then I'll start slowing down and, picking up a jig or a Senko or, something slower, profile or slower fall or dragging.
Right.
And kind of let the fish tell me what they want. Don't try to force a bite, because I've done that before and it always kicks me in the ass. So you got to let the fish tell you what they want. That is key right there.
Now, it's funny I've never fished Mojave. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I don't know exactly what the the clarity of that water. I've heard exactly, I had on the radio program, I had Zach on there and he was talking about, it was 18, 20 feet. You could almost see down in some places. And some, he goes, and
you can see 30 feet.
Yeah. He said in some places, I felt like I could see
I've never seen that.
Yeah. And it was pretty clear. What is the, is that just like, hey man, you gotta downsize your line, you gotta downsize your baits, what is it that that clarity of water, is that just you've got to be as, close to the bait as you absolutely can, or are they still, pretty much throw it out there, whatever, they'll eat it?
We've paired one of the most iconic hulls in the history of bass boats with a proven lineup of trusted accessories. We're bringing you best-in-class value and performance, leaving others in your wake. Turnkey value, turnkey performance. The Pantera 2 is an overachiever in the 19-foot category. Once you hit the throttle, you'll feel the rush, and there's no looking back.
What I did is, I throw my ball head on a spinning reel, and I took all the braid off. Well, not all of it. I left some backing, but
right.
I did not use a leader at all. I put 6 or 8. I had one rod with 6 pound, one rod with 8 pound. I even had one with 4 pound, and I had no braid touching that water at all. And I think that was key. That water was way too clear. I don't know. Some guys may have been using leaders and did well, but for me and a couple other guys that I know that, made it into the top 10, no braid ever touched that water.
Yeah.
So I think that was key. I mean, I could be in 40 feet and I could see down crystal clear what's going on the ground.
That's crazy.
So yeah. Oh, dude, I've never even seen water that clear in my life. I can see my boat shadow in 20 feet.
It kind of gives you a nice perspective.
So I took all the braid off.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you talk a little bit about that side of that kind of format, that kind of, I guess the way that the Apex does all of this work. To where you guys are going, you don't see that it's one of the true, I guess, pro circuits that it's a lot like the MLF Pro, the Bass Pro, or the not the Bass. What's the one they do the original MLF where they just pick a couple of lakes, they take you out there and they just switch on the water and they go. That's what you guys get.
Yeah.
I mean, you get no practice time. Mojave, you didn't even get a ride around, from what I understand, right? You just had to, it's like, there's the lake, go fish, Good luck.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Be back here at your weigh-in time.
How do you think that's changed you as a fisherman? better, worse, made you something that you just, I can't imagine it's too much worse, but I mean, what has that done for you as far as being a better angler, because you're just having to go off of instinct?
I think it definitely helps. It's definitely helped me as an angler to figure it out and figure it out fast. You know what I mean? No messing around and sitting on certain spots for a long time. You're not getting bit, move, or change your bait. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, I like this, the no practice. Like last year, they would announce it, and we would still have time to go to these lakes, right? So, for example, Almanor, I've never been there.
Right.
I've never seen it. I've never even heard of that place. I never went to practice there. I just showed up, fished, and I finished 11th place.
Right.
And I was like, okay, hey, that's good enough. I almost made the top 10. Never even been here before. Perfect. Comanche and Thermalito, I went and practiced.
Yeah.
Because we had the time, and I ended up bombing on both of them. I mean, Comanche a little bit more, but I don't know. When you go into it so you have practice, right?
Right.
You're going into it with a mindset that you're going to catch them the way you were catching them in practice. And I think that's what messed with me so much and made me try to force a bite that's changed compared to when I just show up and figure it out right then and there.
Right.
And I think that's really changing a whole lot on how I'm going to start tackling pro-ams now.
Well, I was going to say,
I'm not going to
part of
the
that
time.
Yeah. Well, part of that is too, is that just to kind of give people an idea of what you're talking about, is that you would be able to practice, but you weren't able to practice except for 30 days before the event. So it wasn't like you were practicing a day or two before. You were practicing 30 days. We all know fishing can change hour to hour, day to day, minute to minute sometimes. 30 days is not a fair practice. I mean, it's a practice. It'll let you get to see the water, kind of understand it a little bit better, but that's not like a fair practice. You're so much. I mean, Thermalito, I guarantee that water came up, it got colder, it did all kinds of changes. So, that's, just to let people know that that's kind of what you're dealing when you talk about practice. It wasn't like, oh, I practiced, a day before, the 2 days before, the weekend before. It was a month. So
yeah. Yeah. And that's what I think messed with me on those two events is I went into it thinking I was going to be able to catch fish doing what I was doing 30 days prior compared to, Almanor or Lake Mojave, where it was just show up and go, figure it out. And so, like I said, I've been one to, take off work and go up before the pro-ams and fish the 2-3 days of practice and then fish the tournament. And I'm not doing that no more.
Yeah.
I end up going out and practicing, and, I try to shake fish off the best I can, but, obviously sometimes they just get it too good. And usually those are the better fish, the ones that you want in the tournament. So this year, I'm not going to practice. I'm just going to go out there and figure it out.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to see how that works for me this year with everything, with the pro-ams, with, the team events and everything. I don't want to go out there and catch my fish before the tournament. I want to figure it out while I'm going out there. And that's what it falls back on. Apex is making me a better angler because I'm having to figure it out on the fly instead of going into it with a preconceived notion that I'm going to catch them doing it, this way.
Right.
And being stubborn and trying to force something that may have changed in the last day or two.
So now you don't know where the next one's at yet, right? This year they're doing it completely different than they did last year, where you guys are you find out, I don't know how early, but you just find out and you're going.
Yeah, basically this year they're just going to tell us, I believe it's 30 days before. So once they tell us, we it's off limits, there's no information. You're kind of just stuck with your phone and YouTube
Right.
for 30 days, trying to figure out something.
Right. You can get public
yeah,
information, right? You can get stuff that, guys that are out fishing those lakes or those tournaments or whatever, that you can get that kind of information as long as it's open to the public. You can't go solicit anything that's private.
Exactly. Yeah, you can go on YouTube or fishing reports and stuff like that. Anything that's, open to the public on the internet, you cannot solicit information from somebody outside of the event.
Right. Okay. I mean, because that's one of the things that I looked at with that event, with that event and the way that it runs is that it's just, I don't know. I like it. I think it does, when you step up and you say that you're going to be a pro and, a professional bass fisherman, or you're going to fish that level. And once you qualify for something like that, going up and being that person and being that, hey, we're doing this at the hardest level you can. Now, electronics make it a little easier, but it's not, compared to 10, 15 years ago, doing this same format would have been tough. Some of the things that you talk about, where you're just dealing with a little flasher going around in a circle. It's like, oh, okay. But I mean, it makes you, it makes you really respect what some of those guys did back, the Bill Dances and the Gary Kleins and all that. Again, it kind of gives you that Roland Martin. It's like, it kind of gives you a little bit of respect on what those guys ended up doing, because they were dealing with that, it's really funny to kind of look back and see how these tournaments ran and the boats they had and the things they went out of. And, the whole, I think one of the things that really kind of gets me, or I think would be really funny to do, is the old Bassmaster Classics used to have, you had a 10-pound limit. That's all you could bring tackle wise. Could you imagine if they did that today and said, you can have, here's a tackle box, you can have it. It can weigh 10 pounds. That's it. That's all you can have. And there's 10 pounds of weight. What would, what do you think that would do? What do you think that would do to most of these guys?
I would be screwed, man. My boat, when I go and fish these Apex events, dude, my boat is loaded with everything I own.
Yeah. You'd have to have that much, you'd have to have that much confidence. Oh, I know. But I mean, you get out there and it's like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I think I could get a bite with a jig, and you don't have any because they weighed too much for you to do that. And you didn't think it was going to be there.
Well, there's a bunch of grass and you couldn't bring all your punch and stuff.
Yep. It's just one of those things that it's like, oh man, I think that would add such a depth of I don't know, just like, good luck guys, because this is all you can have. You can't load your boat up. You can have 5 rods and you can have 10 pounds of tackle.
I'm sure my boat would love it. I think it would be hauling.
Yeah, you'd pick up an extra 15, 20 miles.
I could get out of the hole faster.
Exactly. Right. But you look at those old things, and that's what they were dealing with in those old classics. They didn't see it. They didn't know where they were going until they got to the, till 30,000 feet or whatever. And then they'd have to get there and they got 10 pounds of tackle and 5 rods or 7 rods or something. It's like, wow. Okay. And they figured it out. And
who brought the winning stuff?
Yeah, exactly. And they would figure it out, and they would have big weights, and it's like, wow, that is impressive. I think it would be very interesting for any circuit out there right now to kind of fall back and go, okay, you can only have 2 fish finders, and they can only be set on traditional, and and you can only have 5 rods, and you can only have this much tackle. You would devastate some guys. You would absolutely, you'd have guys literally standing in the parking lot crying, I can't do that.
Yeah, after you just spent 20 grand on electronics.
Yeah,
you got to take 3 of them off.
Yep. It's like, yeah, leave those in the truck. What? No. But I mean, it's an interesting concept to think about, what we've come from, or where we've come from to where we are now, and how much all this different stuff makes. I just heard you talk about it, and I talked to Zach about it. And it was the same thing. It was, now he's got the Panoptics, or he's got the Live Scope or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, it's such a game changer. I mean, it's just, you're seeing so many different things. And there are guys who buy it just because they have the money to buy it. They put it on there. They don't know what they're looking at, or they don't know how to dial it in, or they don't want to take the classes and learn it and figure it out. And
yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, when you put that kind of electronics on there, it is a game changer. I mean, when you understand it and you can figure it out, it will absolutely up your game, because you are like the live scope, like you talked about, or the Panoptics. It's you're looking forward, you're looking sideways, you're looking whatever, and you're just seeing that school of fish. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. Not only am I seeing, I know there's fish there, or I think there's fish there, but I pull up on something and there's a bush out there. And that bush is alive. The one to the right, not so much. The one to the left, not so much. The one but that one's alive. That's the one I got to fish now.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about
crazy,
what that does for you as far as a tournament angler. How much time does that
cuts down
shave?
a lot of wasted time. You know what I mean? For the longest time, I'd always seen it, but I never seen it in action. I always saw videos, this and that. But once I finally ended up buying it,
mm-hmm.
and figuring out how to use it, oh my gosh. I mean, there's no guessing anymore. It's not a guess. It's either they're there or they're not. You know what I mean? And the one thing, okay, locating fish, okay, cool. You can locate them, but what is that going to do if you can't catch them? So the cool thing that I really like about it is I can see how these fish react to the baits that I'm throwing.
Right.
You know what I mean? If I'm throwing an underspin or a chatterbait and they're following it but not committing to it, or an A-rig. A-rig is a perfect example. They're following it, but they're not committing. They're just tailing it the whole time. Then, okay, maybe they don't like the color that I'm throwing. Now I can change my color, throw it back out there. Okay, he's following it, but he's still not committing. Okay, let's try a smaller one. Let's go from a 3.8 to a 3.3 and so far down. And now they're smashing it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Or for example, last year I was throwing the A-rig in practice and I was catching them. So I was confident that I was going to catch them in the tournament. But of course, cloudy day in practice turns to a sunny day in the tournament. So I was still throwing it in the morning.
Right.
And I did catch, a couple decent fish. But as the day progressed, I'll chuck that thing out there. I'll let it hit the ground and I will lock into it with my live scope. I want to see exactly what's happening behind that thing. If I could see them trailing it and twitch it and they can commit, cool. But what I was finding out was I would have like 6 or 7 follow it, right? But they wouldn't commit. No matter what I did, they would not commit to it. But once I got the A-rig back to the boat, they would all just kind of fall down to the bottom and literally sit under the boat. So what I would do is I'd throw that thing out there. I'd lure 6 or 7 of them up to the boat. I'd reel that thing in real fast and pick up a shaky head and drop it straight down and catch one. And that's basically what I was doing in the tournament. I would throw that thing out there. I'd let them follow it back to the boat. I'd pick up a shaky head, drop it down, catch one. It was like I was pulling them off whatever they were doing. And they were so interested in that A-rig, and they would literally just come straight to me. I didn't have to go find them. I didn't have to do anything. I would literally lure them back to the boat and drop down and catch one. It's just amazing what the technology, what they've come out with. Because if you didn't have that, for example, you'd be throwing that thing out there thinking they're just not biting it.
Right.
But in reality, they're following it. They're just not committing, but there's another way to catch them. You could see how they react to different things. So I'm literally watching these fish come back to me, and now I could catch them because I know they're there.
Yeah, that's definitely a plus. If you're luring fish in just so you can get them on there and then catch them, that's moving them off a structure you can't get to or whatever, and then and not trying to fight them that far back. Like you say, you're dropping straight back down, you're catching those fish right there. I mean, that's a definite thing. But the ability to see it happen, the ability to watch that all play out, and then understand what you can do to catch those fish after that. I mean, I mean, that's 100%, they call it a game changer. That's a game changer. That's not something you would do with traditional electronics. The guy standing up there with his electronics looking straight down at the bottom, he's not going to see all that happen. He's not going to see that. And so it does make a play for, what that is. I've seen so many different things, I think, in the last probably 5 to 6 years that have really come along that, have made that, spot lock being probably one of the top ones that I've noticed. This Panoptix, this live scope, this kind of equipment that's come out has just absolutely made it so different, how we fish and the way that we approach fishing,
Mm-hmm. I mean, you got what, 3D? What does Humminbird have?
Oh, the 360, the 360.
Lowrance 360. Yes, 360. So now Lowrance just gave it to everyone who has, a HCS live or a carbon unit with a Ghost trolling motor. You get it for free. Wow.
That's impressive.
Yep. All you got to do is update it and have the 3-in-1 nose cone on their Ghost trolling motor.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't tried it yet, but yeah, they uploaded it now. So we get it, you don't have to have that big bulky, ball hanging off your trolling motor with your live scope and every other gadget hanging off there.
Right. No, that's impressive. That it's just, I don't know where fishing's going at this point. I don't really know. I know for the average guy sitting on the bank, or the average guy that's out there that is a weekend, is it price effective to do all that? No. Will it make you a better fisherman? Probably. If you get it. And the key to that is that all this new equipment, all this new stuff, I think spot lock's probably the number one thing that's changed the game for a lot of people, because you can go out there and now it's windy, it's this or that, and you're trying to fight a fish, and it's like, just push a button, man, and you ain't going nowhere. You'll start right back where you were.
Yeah.
You'll come back up. You're not worried about blowing halfway across the lake, or trying to hit the trolling motor and all these different things to try to get this done or that done or whatever. It's just ridiculous. It's like, yep, that thing above everything else, that's probably the number one thing I've seen come along that's really changed the game. I mean, when the anchors out, when the shallow anchors came out, the power poles, the talons, all that stuff, when that all came out, it was, for us, I never saw it really mean anything. Here and there, if you were bed fishing or something, it seemed like you were putting $5,000 worth of equipment on the back of your boat so you could bed fish, because the honest result was, or sit at the Delta, or sit at one of those places where, you in the morning, so you wouldn't have to blast off or something. You could just sit there and blast off and hold still. I don't see a lot of it for out, at Oroville, they're useless. At, Shasta, Clear Lake, these things are, it's just barely you're going to make them worthwhile, unless you're up there in 3 or 4 feet of water. But that shallow, that anchor system that on that spot lock is just crazy. So.
Yeah. See, when the power poles came out, that was like mind blown for us Delta guys,
mm-hmm.
because, the spot lock feature, I don't really use it on the river.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely ever. But when power poles came out, oh my gosh. Yeah, because it's such a shallow water, you can use them everywhere.
Right.
So, the current's pushing you, wind's pushing you, whatever, and you're flipping a bank, and there's one little spot where you really want to get beep, beep, power pole down. You could literally sit in there and pick that whole pocket apart. Or, you see the perfect line for a frogfish.
Right.
And you could drop them. Out here, that was huge. I use my power poles probably more than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I use them probably 50 times today in the short time that I was out.
Right.
So it's basically like spot lock for lake guys, power poles for Delta guys.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then when you, like I said, when you go down south, you go to Florida, if you don't have power poles on, you're wasting your time, because you're only fishing in 8 feet of water anyway. So a 12-foot power poles on there, or talon, whatever. Yeah. You're absolutely, I don't know why you would never, you can sit on one, you can sit on one brush pile, you can sit on one bank, you can sit on one little area of grass and throw and just pick it apart and pick it apart and pick it apart. Like I said, but you get to Oroville, you get to Shasta, you get to Clear Lake, you get to, some of these lakes across the country, that are big and everything. You're not fishing. Those things are almost, I don't want to say useless, but they're just not a factor. So like you say, spot lock on the lakes, Berryessa, where are you going to use the power poles for the most of the time? Very rarely.
Yeah. I'll
yeah.
use them on the lake. I'll pull up on a point
Right.
or something. If I'm sitting out deep and I'm throwing towards the point and they're not eating it, I'll take my boat and power pole down on the point, throw out deep and drag it uphill.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point, because that's a lot of, a lot of that happened. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm not saying I'm not saying they're not worth having. I'm just saying it's one of those things that can, for the majority of people out here in the West, fishing our deep water impoundments, that thing, the spot lock just was I think is still the biggest game changer so far. So
definitely.
Yeah. And now and then you get into the electronics and everything else. It's pretty interesting. So, but Nick, it's running on our time here, and I got to wrap her up for the hour. So, thanks for coming on, man. I love talking fishing with guys, and you're one of those guys that, fishing the Apex, fishing this stuff, the amount of the differences that you've come across with. You went from the river, growing up a river guy, fishing lakes now, figuring that out. Now fishing at the top level we have out here in the West at the Apex, and you've come a long ways in a short period of time, and it's really good to hear from you and get your kind of perspective on things and the way you approach them. So I appreciate you coming on, and thank you.
No worries, man. Thanks for having me. I could talk fishing all day long. That's probably the one conversation I actually enjoy having. So.
Yeah, I know. I do that. I got told I got to keep these things short. So that's what we try to run on that hour. But Nick, I appreciate it, man. And we'll catch you guys out there on the next one. Hopefully you win one of these Apex events. We'll have you back on and we'll talk about the win. So thanks for coming on again. And thanks for tuning in tonight. We're back up running a little bit better. All the storms are over. Everything's kind of done. And we really appreciate you. Bam will be at the ISE show. So come on down, see us at the event. We've got our best deals of the season down there. So come on in, see us up there. Anybody listening to this across the country, the weekend after, I will be up working in the New England Sports Expo. And so if you're up that way, come in, get the best deals that Bass Angler Magazine has to offer at the shows. And so thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys again.